All right, I'm joined by the host of the Murph and Mac Show from 6 to 10 a.m. on KNBR, Brian Murphy. How are you? Thanks so much for coming on.
Happy to be here, Mike, helping out the next generation of broadcasters here, and it's good to see you pursuing it down there at Arizona State. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, and also a couple of North Bay people coming at it right here. So Petaluma and Mill Valley. In doing research about you, I saw that you had started at the Tamalpais newspaper, Tam News. First, I just wanted to get a sense of what brought you to journalism. Like, was it a specific person, game, event? What kind of made you fall in love with this business?
Well, that's something, it's funny, through the years you talk about it and you keep coming back to the same answer, is that it just was in my blood or sort of just destined, in the sense that I never remember really wanting to do anything else. Like, from a young age, for whatever reason, sports pages held a tremendous allure over me. The magazine Sports Illustrated, which came every week, was like a weekly. It was like a magic moment when it came in the mailbox, and I opened the mailbox and out it came. And to just pour over those pages, there was just kind of no place I would rather be than reading the best writers writing about sports, looking at the best photographers taking pictures of sports, and just living in these sports worlds with these sports stories. And it really truly was, I mean, they say it's your calling, and it really was something that I didn't want to go to law school. I didn't want to go to medical school. I didn't want to go to business school. It was really the only thing I ever wanted to do. So I often tell people when they're starting out, you have to love it. You have to really have a great love and passion for sports journalism. And if you do, you can have a really great and productive life in what seems like never a job. It never has seemed like a job ever.
What is something that, as you learn through high school and college about the field, what is something you learned that you have used the most to kind of benefit you and where you're at right now?
Well, it's probably, sort of alluding to what I just said. You have to kind of love it, but that's not something you learn. That's something you're born with. Mm-hmm. I would say I learned that you, even though it's a really fun job, and even though it doesn't seem like work, I would say doing the work is really important. And by that, I mean learning as much as you can about everything that you are studying or talking about or writing about or researching. Meaning, if there's a baseball story to be read, read it. If there's a baseball game to watch, see it. If there's a football story to be read, read it. If there's a football game to watch it. If there's a basketball story to read it. If there's a basketball game to watch it. I mean, immerse yourself. Don't be the person who just kind of comes up with his or her half-baked opinions without doing the work, without doing the research, without doing the interviews. So what I learned was you will get farther the harder you work.
Where do you see the current state of journalism? Obviously, it's changed a whole lot. It's become a very polarizing business in terms of both news and politics, but also to a certain degree in sports. What do you see the biggest difference in the actual journalism industry from when you were in college and just starting out in the workforce as opposed to now?
Well, it's a great question. It's kind of the essence of it right there. And I almost feel like my answer is going to fall on a generational gap, in that I come from a different school than your generation is coming up. Your generation is coming up with these highly polarized opinion shows. And I understand it. I'm entertained by them too. The Stephen A. Smiths of the world and people like that who entertain us and kind of set the debate now. The state of journalism is now valuing that over what I grew up with, which was long, calm, measured, reported stories, stories that emphasized writing ability, stories that emphasized reporting ability, the things that sort of old-fashioned, hate to sound like it's such an old man, but old-fashioned things that were more substantive and less flashy, perhaps. Now, I get it. The world changes and you have to change with it. And you guys are coming up in which you have to maybe grab the attention of your listener, your reader, your viewer a little more quickly. So the state of journalism right now is, in my view, I'm a little concerned with people coming to opinions and thoughts without maybe doing the work or doing the research or talking to the people they need to talk to, and sort of just thinking that having an opinion is okay. I mean, I guess it's okay to have an opinion. Yes, it's fun, but it's nicer when it's an informed opinion. You're kind of seeing it play out right now with this Jimmy G stuff. I mean, there were people on social media who were certain that they had the information that Jimmy Garoppolo, Matt Stafford was going to be a 49er.
Mm-hmm.
Well, guess what? He wasn't a 49er. So that's the state of journalism, Michael.
Yeah, decided to go down south to Los Angeles, and that was a surprising move in and of itself. But I kind of get what you're saying is like you watch these shows and it's more opinion rather than news. And that's, you know, I had a discussion in one of my classes about that, where it used to be you had the news anchors and then you maybe had an opinion show in the late night area, kind of like where there's comedy shows like Jimmy Kimmel or Jimmy Fallon or Seth Meyers. Now it's just all opinion. And that's where you kind of have to draw the line of, you know, what's opinion versus news. So it's a challenge for all of us, that's for sure. I do want to get into some Giants now because opening day and spring training is just about to start. It's going to start on time, February 17th, 2 weeks from today. Boy, I can't wait for that. Giants fell one game out last year. They had a couple of chances to get into the playoffs and lost the final 2 games to the Padres. What are you expecting now? We're going to have a full season, hopefully, or close to a full season. You got guys like Brandon Belt, Buster Posey, Johnny Cueto, Brandon Crawford, all up at the end of the year. What is your general sense of what the Giants are going to do in 2021? And do you see some of those guys being traded perhaps mid-season?
Well, they seem to be, I've sort of had this joke going on the show that like the Dodgers and Padres are in a nuclear arms race and we're Luxembourg or Liechtenstein in it. You know what I mean? Like the Giants are like not even in this conversation that the Dodgers and Padres have created. I mean, of course, you got to play the games. We'll see what happens. However, there is a strong indication that 2021 will not be the year the Giants win the National League West. There's a strong indication that it will be a 2-man race between the Dodgers and the Padres. So what does that tell you as a Giants fan? It tells you that it seems like since Farhan took over, Farhan Zaidi, the head of baseball ops, as we see it play out with the way he's behaving and the way he's letting this sort of unfold before our eyes, it seems like when he and Larry Baer got together before the 2019 season and he got hired, he probably told Larry and the investors and the owners, this ain't going to happen for 3 or 4 years, guys. And you can just see they're not signing George Springer. They haven't signed Trevor Bauer. Now, if you put this Zoom out there and they sign Trevor Bauer, I feel the right to edit this, but it's probably not going to sign Trevor Bauer. They're not trading for, the big trades, the Nolan Arenados or the Mookie Bettses of the world who got traded in the last year or two. It seems like Farhan is waiting for the contracts to expire and the young kids to come up. The Elliot Ramoses, Marco Lucianos, Joey Bart, Seth Core, all the guys we've been hearing about for years and years. Now, that puts a lot of pressure on these prospects. They're going to have to perform. Not every prospect pans out. But it also means that probably starting next year, they're going to have a lot more money to spend. And there's a huge free agent class coming up. So it seems like they're telling us without telling us, just hang tight for another year. We'll be as competitive as we can be. Farhan does deserve a lot of credit, and Gabe Kapler and his coaching staff for changing the offensive approach last year. That was a huge, huge sea change. I've been a little skeptical because we watched what Bruce Bochy did and we're like thinking, boy, how can anybody ever match what Bruce Bochy and Tim Lincecum and Madison Bumgarner and Matt Cain and Buster Posey did? And I think one thing we have to admit is that the hitting approach that Farhan and Gabe's staff produced was a remarkable change. The power and the ability to come back in games, and they were down 3, 4, 5 runs and still win games, was totally new. So I'm encouraged by their offense. I'm a little discouraged that they are sort of left in the dust by the Dodgers and the Padres. And I'm sort of also understanding that probably starting in 2022, the Giants will start to be in that mix with the Dodgers and the Padres and hopefully launch sort of a new decade, but probably not this year, Michael.
Yeah. Well, do you see any of those guys being traded? I mean, yeah, you're going to lose the money at the end of the season, but why not try and get a couple of prospects for them if you're going to be out of it by, June?
For sure. I mean, that's definitely extremely a Farhan type of move to get what you can. Now the question is, what will their value be? What will another team want with, maybe a team will want a veteran shortstop like a Brandon Crawford, because he can play defense and October proven. Maybe Brandon Belt will be hitting well and some team will have them, or maybe they won't. Maybe if they're not having good years, who knows what their value will be. So I would definitely, to answer your question, say that it's a possibility for sure. And it's something we should watch. Probably not with Buster Posey. I would imagine they would probably keep him. But Farhan's a new guy. I mean, we're still getting to know him. We've had 2 full seasons with him. He's been very incrementalist. One of our listeners wrote in and said he's an incrementalist. I like that. He's doing these really small moves, these little 1-year deals. I mean, Tommy La Stella getting 3 years was like a huge deal.
Yeah.
So we're still learning what he's doing. Is he the kind of guy who would trade a Crawford, a Belt, a Posey, a Cueto? We're finding that out. Cueto probably is another one that would have value to a team if he's pitching well. I would say of all the players you mentioned, Cueto would be the one most likely to be moved because everybody wants arms in October, and he would be maybe a valuable veteran arm.
I want to move on to the Hall of Fame process. We just got done with the voting. No one got in. Bonds and Clemens have 1 more year left. What are your thoughts on the whole process and the writers voting on it? And then there's also that debate of if the Astros cheating scandal is worse than the PEDs, which basically took up an entire era. Just gonna give me your thoughts on that whole thing.
It's a mess, is my thoughts. It's a total mess. So
Yeah.
I'm old enough to know when Baseball Hall of Fame was the best Hall of Fame of any of the major sports. So like when I was growing up, it seemed like they had the standard just right. It was a hard standard, but it wasn't an impossible standard. And guys like, I'm just going to throw out a couple of names from my generation, Dale Murphy and Will Clark, who were legendary players, but didn't quite have the longevity as some other players, didn't make it in. And it was hard for me, like who loved Will Clark, but I would have to look at it and think, I have respect for the Baseball Hall of Fame. They have a real tough standard. And so when people get in, it means something, really meaningful. And then steroids came. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing got blown to heaven. And now we don't know what's real, what's not, what was prevalent, what was not, how you should represent that era in terms of telling the story of baseball versus pretending it never happened. There's no guidance on this. There's no direction. There's no rule. That's the problem, is the Baseball Hall of Fame has gotten along for 70 years by letting the writers vote. And then the writers were presented with a problem that was very sticky. And some of them thought, well, steroids were so prevalent and it was part of baseball, I'm going to vote for Bonds and Clemens. Another part said, no way. There's a character clause. Drugs are cheating. Cheating is never allowed. No way I'm ever going to vote for them. And the Baseball Hall of Fame doesn't have an answer for it. And you as a fan are sort of left to make your own value judgment. And you can even see the writers. These are great, respected writers that think about the game for a long time. Even you'll take 2 writers who you like, and like I'll take 2 writers who I love. Tom Verducci and Bruce Jenkins are 2 great baseball writers. Mm-hmm. They're on completely opposite sides. Verducci will never vote for Bonds and Clemens. Jenkins will vote for Bonds and Clemens. So that's how sticky the situation is. It's really unfortunate, and it's damaged the Baseball Hall of Fame dramatically. And now, unfortunately, a once great institution is now ridiculed, demeaned, and not treated as lofty as it was. So there's no right answer is the short answer. It's whatever you think is the right answer.
Yeah, I think the Hall of Fame was kind of like that last institution that everybody kind of looked at as, the sacred chalice, the sacred place of baseball. And now that, like you said, it's been to me. Final question, because I know you got to go. Would you vote them in your view?
I would. And it's tough for me to say that because I grew up with a dad who was my dad was a lawyer for the state of California. He was a real rule follower. He was a real ethical guy. And I can hear my late father in my ear saying, there's a character clause. They had an unfair advantage. Not everybody was doing steroids. Therefore, those who were cheating to gain an edge should not be honored. I hear that. And then I think about what I saw with my eyes, what I saw with Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens. I know that they were not at all the products of steroids. I know that they were 2 of the greatest players I ever saw. And I've come to a conclusion that the Baseball Hall of Fame, as sacred as it is, should tell the story of baseball, and steroids were the story of baseball in the 1990s and the 2000s. The anecdote I always use, Michael, I'll leave you this one, is when Barry Bonds hit his 714th home run to tie Babe Ruth, or pardon me, 755th home run to tie Hank Aaron.
Yeah.
He did it in San Diego off a journeyman pitcher named Clay Hensley, who actually wound up having a cup of coffee with the Giants too. Here's the catch. Clay Hensley had been busted for steroids. That to me summed up the era. That an absolute, the guy who was the villain of villains, the most hated man in America because he used steroids, hit the record-tying home run off a guy nobody had ever heard of, who nobody ever knew, also used steroids. So that to me, it's not the anecdote that answers it all, but it sure does illustrate to me how widespread it was, how impossible it was for us to know who was using and who wasn't. And at that point, you sort of have to say, it was so undefinable. Let's just go back to what happened on the field. And Bonds and Clemens were the best. Put them in.
I agree, 100%. Brian, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And have a safe drive to San Francisco.
Michael, I'm proud of the young generation coming up. Keep working hard, and we'll catch you down the road.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Bye.
Hope that worked.
Thank you. It did.
Okay. See ya.
Bye-bye.